The pool lights were already on when Declan came through the gate, which meant she had been here before she knocked on his door. He noticed it the way he noticed most things, quietly, without announcing the noticing, and he filed it next to the other things he had collected about tonight. The fact that she had knocked at 11:38 rather than texting, which she usually did when she wanted something low stakes. The fact that she had said, "Come down for a swim," with the specific lightness people use when they have rehearsed something and want it to sound unrehearsed. The fact that he had said yes before she finished the sentence, which he had not examined and was not going to examine right now. The pool area was at the back of the building, separated from the parking structure by a low wall and accessible through a gate that required a fob and a 4-digit code, both of which he had and rarely used because the pool was open May through September and he had moved in October, and by the time May came, he had fallen into the habit of his evenings, and the pool had remained theoretical. But Nora had the lights on, the specific blue-green that came up through the water and spread across the concrete in shifting patterns. That light required a trip to the utility closet on the ground floor, to the breaker panel labeled in small print that he had helped her read in March when her kitchen circuit tripped and she had knocked on his door with her phone flashlight on and expression of practical calm that he had found, privately, very appealing. She had gone to the utility closet before she knocked on his door. That was the sequence. She was standing at the edge of the deep end when he came through, looking at the water with her arms loose at her sides, wearing a light dress in a dark color that the pool light turned into something between navy and black. On the table to her left there was a small Bluetooth speaker running something he didn't recognize, acoustic, unhurried, the kind of music chosen deliberately rather than shuffled into. 2 drinks were sweating on the concrete beside it. 2 chairs had been unfolded and angled toward each other at the shallow end, not parallel but conversational. The angle of people who intend to look at each other. Under the table there was a canvas bag, medium-sized, the zipper pulled fully closed. He looked at all of it in the way he looked at things that were trying to tell him something. "You came," she said. She didn't turn around when she said it, which meant she had heard the gate. "You knocked," he said, which was true and also not an explanation. And she seemed to understand that he knew it wasn't an explanation, because she turned then with a small expression that acknowledged the non-explanation without pressing it. Nora had lived in 1115 for 14 months. He had been in 1114 for 14 months and 3 weeks, which meant he had been there first, which meant he was the one who heard the moving truck and looked through his peephole with the idle curiosity of a man who had learned what the building's turnover rhythm felt like and was noting a new data point. He had seen a green chair being maneuvered through the hallway, a large, impractical, clearly beloved green chair that was not going to fit in the elevator and eventually didn't, requiring 2 trips up the stairs and the involvement of both her and the delivery man, and then, at the second-floor landing, him, because he had opened his door when he heard the struggle, and it had seemed unreasonable not to help. They had not introduced themselves until the chair was in her apartment. He had been holding one end of it for 11 minutes before he knew her name. That was the beginning. Everything since had been, he was not sure exactly what to call everything since. The accumulation of small things, the pattern of them, which he had noticed and not named. "You've been down here already," he said. "Before you knocked, the lights needed to be on," she said. "The utility closet. It's not a difficult process." "No," he said. "It just takes intention." She looked at him with the particular expression she used when someone had said the accurate thing and she was deciding whether to agree with it directly or let it stand without comment. She let it stand. She picked up one of the drinks from the concrete and held it out to him, something with lime, cold enough that the condensation was already heavy on the glass, which meant she had made it before she came down here, which meant she had made 2 drinks in her apartment and carried them to the pool before she knocked on his door to invite him to the pool. He took the drink. He tasted it. It was the kind of drink he would have ordered, which he had never told her, which she would have had to have noticed on her own. Last night, before they close it for the season, she said, Management sent the email today. October 1st is the last day. Do you read the management emails? I read everything that comes to my inbox. She looked at the water. I know that's unusual. It's thorough, he said. It's anxious, she said, in the tone she used when she was being precise about herself, which she did with the specific unself-consciousness of someone who had put in the work to see herself clearly and had decided that pretending otherwise was inefficient. I read all my emails, so nothing surprises me. It's a coping mechanism dressed as a personality trait. He drank his drink and looked at the pool. The water moved slightly from the circulation system, small ripples crossing each other in the blue-green light, and the night was warm above them in the way late August nights were warm, not pressing. Just present. The accumulated heat of the day stored in the concrete and the air. So, he said. So, she said. We're swimming. That's the plan, she said. Good plan, he said, and waited, because there was something in her posture, the way she was standing at the edge of the deep end, very still, looking at the water with the expression she had when a thing she had been thinking about was about to become a thing. She said out loud that told him there was a second part to this. She turned to face him fully. The pool light came up from below and made the shadows fall the wrong way, upward, which should have looked strange, but on her looked like something a photographer would have planned. She looked at him with her chin up and her hands at her sides and her expression composed in the way that things are composed when some effort is going into the composing. There's a small problem, she said. Okay. I forgot my swimsuit. He held his drink and looked at her and did not say anything for a moment. He thought about the pool lights requiring a trip to the utility closet. He thought about 2 drinks made in her apartment and carried down here cold. He thought about the bag under the table, zipped, which had the particular shape of a bag packed with organization and purpose. He thought about 2 chairs angled toward each other in the way people angle chairs when they intend to have a conversation rather than share a view. He thought about Nora, who read all her management emails, so nothing surprised her. Nora, who planned things with the thoroughness of someone who did not trust improvisation with anything important. You forgot it, he said. These things happen, she said, in the tone of someone describing a general category of human experience. You went to the utility closet and found the pool breaker, which is labeled in very small print, he said. You made 2 drinks and brought them down here cold. You brought a speaker and a bag and set up 2 chairs. Also correct. But you forgot the swimsuit. I was in a hurry, she said. Were you? She looked at him. The composure was still there, but something behind it had shifted slightly, not cracking, just acknowledging that he was reading the situation accurately and that she had perhaps expected it to take him longer. Do you want me to go get it? She said. Do you want to go get it? He said. A pause. A short one. But real. No, she said. He looked at her for a long moment in the blue-green light, and she looked back at him with the expression she was done managing. And the night sat around them warm and still, and the speaker played its unhurried music and the water moved its small movements. He finished his drink. He set the glass on the concrete with a precise click. He pulled his shirt over his head and set it on the nearest chair. And he walked to the edge of the pool and went in feet first at the shallow end. And the water was warmer than he'd expected, August all the way through it, and he came up and pushed his hair back and turned around. Nora had watched him go in. She was standing at the edge where he'd left her, at the deep end, and she had the expression of someone who had planned for several contingencies and was now recalibrating for the specific one that had occurred. Then she reached down and pulled the dress over her head in a single motion. Underneath was a dark one-piece swimsuit, simple and unperformed. She set the dress on the chair beside his shirt with the tidiness she brought to all physical things, walked to the edge, and entered the water with the clean, controlled motion of someone who had been swimming for a long time. She came up 10 feet away from him. The water settled around her. She pushed her hair back with both hands and looked at him across the 10 feet of warm blue water. You were already wearing it, he said. I told you I forgot it, she said. You were already wearing it when you knocked on my door." She looked at him with an expression that was entirely level and gave nothing away, and was itself the most complete confirmation he could have received. Then she said, "The water's good," and turned and pushed off toward the deep end, her stroke clean and economical. And he stayed where he was for a moment in the shallow warmth and looked at where she had been and then at where she was going. He followed. That, too, felt like it had been decided before tonight. He caught up to her at the deep end and they turned and swam back, side by side, not racing, not performing, just moving through the water together in the blue-green light at 11:40-something on a Thursday night. And the building rose above them with its lights mostly off. And the city beyond that was the city, doing what cities did. And down here in the pool it was very quiet and very warm and entirely separate from all of that. They reached the shallow end and both stopped at the wall, turning to rest their backs against it, shoulder width of water between them. His breathing had evened out. Hers was already even, had probably not changed. Above them, a window on the second floor showed a light, someone's television casting blue-white flicker, and then it went dark as whoever it was went to bed. He looked at the bag under the table, the chair angles, the 2 drinks, his already done. "You were always going to come in the pool," he said. "You planned to." She looked at the water ahead of them. "I planned to swim," she said. "Yes." "Then why the story?" She was quiet for a moment that was long enough to mean she was choosing the honest answer over the easier one. "Because I needed you to ask a question," she said. "And I didn't know how to make you ask it without giving you something to ask about." He stood in the warm water at the edge of the pool and let that settle, the way he let things settle when they were telling him something real. The speaker across the pool was playing something slower now, just a piano. The notes spaced out like they had somewhere to be, but weren't in a rush to get there. A second window in the building came on ground floor, second from the left, and a shadow moved across it. "You could have just asked me," he said. "I could have," she said. "And you would have said yes or no before you finished thinking about it. I needed you to come to a question, not answer one." He looked at her profile in the upward light, the line of her jaw, the particular set of her mouth when she was being precise. She was not wrong about how he operated. He had a tendency to answer first and think second, to protect his ground before he'd fully surveyed it. And she had been his neighbor for 14 months and had apparently learned this about him without him knowing she was learning it. That, too, was information. "What question?" he said. "Did you need me to ask?" She turned to look at him. The pool light came up through the water between them and made everything the color of something that hadn't been named yet. "Any of them," she said. "The ones you've been not asking." He held her eyes. She held his. The piano played its spaced-out notes and the water was warm around them and the night held still. He had questioned. He had been not asking them, which she had apparently noticed, which meant she had been watching for whether he would ask them, which meant she had been waiting, which meant there was something to wait for, which was the thing he had been not letting himself be certain of for 7 months and possibly longer. "Okay," he said. It wasn't a question, but she seemed to understand it as the beginning of one. They didn't stay at the wall. Nora pushed off first, moving toward the middle of the pool with the same economical stroke she'd used before, and he followed. And they fell into a loose parallel that wasn't synchronized exactly, but had a natural rhythm to it. The way 2 people fall into step when they've walked together enough times. The deep end, the turn, the shallow end. The turn he counted 4 lengths before she stopped at the center of the pool, where the depth was 5 feet and she could stand. And he stopped beside her. The speaker was still going. It had moved into something with a guitar now, a single line repeating with small variations, patient and unhurried. The pool lights shifted slightly as a cloud moved somewhere above the building. He could see it in the way the blue on the concrete changed, deepened, then came back, and the night stayed warm around them. That specific late August warmth that doesn't cool even when the sun's been down for hours. You come down here much, he asked. Before tonight, twice since May, she said. Once in June when it was unbearable inside and the AC was being serviced, once in July by myself at this hour. Which was different. Different how? No one else, she said. No other reasons. He understood the distinction she was making without her having to explain it further. Which was how most of the things she said worked. She used the minimum number of words for the actual content and left the rest for him to fill in, which he'd come to understand was a form of trust rather than withholding. She was not a person who over-explained. She offered what she meant and waited to see if you could receive it. He moved his hand through the water, feeling the resistance of it, the way it pushed back with exactly the force you gave it. The pool lights made his hand look different underwater longer, slightly greenish, like a version of a hand from some more aquatic world. The email about October 1st, he said. When did it come? She looked at him with a slight change in expression not caught exactly, but seen. This morning, she said. When this morning? 7:42, she said. Roughly. I don't track the precise times of emails, but you remember 7:42. I remember that I'd had coffee and was still in bed and checked my phone when it came in. She moved her arms through the water in a slow figure 8. And then, I made a decision. What decision? To use the email as a reason, she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression she had when she had said the accurate thing and was making no move to walk it back. There was something in the way she held a statement she'd committed to a kind of stillness, a done quality that he had first noticed the night they carried the green chair upstairs, when she had said it's not going to fit in the elevator with the flat certainty of someone who has measured and knows, and he had tested the elevator anyway because he was like that. And she had waited, and the chair hadn't fit. You decided this morning, he said. I decided this morning to act on something I'd been deciding for a while. She corrected. The precision was characteristic. The email was a useful boundary. An ending date. October 1st. After that, the pool closes and the reason is gone. He thought about that. He thought about what it meant that she needed a reason, and what kind of person looks for reasons rather than making them, and whether he was the same kind, and suspected they might be the same kind, which would explain several things. Across the pool, the door to the building opened and Mrs. Okafor came through in her robe and her slide sandals, carrying what appeared to be a glass of water and moving with the particular unhurried authority of a woman in her 70s who had lived in this building since before most of its current tenants were adults. She went to the narrow strip of deck on the north side, the part that stayed dry, away from the pool itself, and sat in the single chair there that she apparently considered hers, because Declan had seen her in it before at odd hours, and she settled into it with the patient quality of someone with nowhere else to be. She looked at the pool. She looked at the two of them standing in the water at its center. She did not look away. Good evening, Declan said. It's nearly midnight. Mrs. Okafor said. It's barely evening anymore. But she said it without criticism, with the mild observation of someone who has long since stopped organizing the world into appropriate and inappropriate and has arrived at something calmer. Mrs. Okafor, Nora said. I'm sorry if we woke you. I don't sleep well after 10. Mrs. Okafor said, which was not quite an acceptance of the apology and not quite a dismissal of it. She settled further into her chair. I heard the gate. They stood in the water. Mrs. Okafor sat in her chair. The speaker played its guitar pattern. You two are neighbors. Mrs. Okafor said. After a moment, not a question. She knew the building the way people know a place they have occupied for decades, the unit numbers, the faces, the comings and goings. 11, 14, and 15. Declan said, I know which units. She drank her water. I've been watching you be very polite to each other for over a year. Nora made a small sound that was not quite a laugh. Declan said nothing. My husband and I were polite to each other for 3 months. Mrs. Okafor said, Then I told him he was wasting my time and we got married. She set her glass on the arm of the chair with a precise click. That was 41 years ago. He passed 6 years ago. She looked at the water. I still think 3 months was too long to be polite. She stood. Then, gathering her robe with one hand and her glass with the other, and she walked back toward the building door with the same unhurried authority she'd arrived with. At the door she paused. "About time," she said, without turning around, and went inside. The door closed. The pool area was quiet again. Declan and Nora stood in the water in the center of the pool and did not immediately say anything, which felt correct given the circumstances. The guitar on the speaker finished its pattern and started a new variation. 41 years, Nora said finally. She said 3 months was too long. He said, "We've been at this 14 months. We have." She looked at him. "She's going to think we're very slow." "She's already formed that opinion," he said. Nora laughed, the real one, the unself-conscious version that she didn't always let out. And it changed the quality of the air around them. He felt the pull of it the way he always felt the pull of it, the specific warmth of it landing, and he did the thing he usually did when he felt things too clearly, which was to let them settle rather than respond to them immediately. She moved through the water toward the shallow end. Not swimming but walking, the water dragging at her. He followed. She stopped when the water was at her ribs and turned to lean against the wall with her arms behind her on the pool edge. And he stopped a few feet away and leaned the same way. Both of them looking out at the pool from the shallow end. The pool looked different from here. Longer. The lights at the deep end were farther away. The water between dark and blue, and above it the building rose with its collection of rectangles, some lit and some not. Lives being lived at various stages of their evenings. "Tell me something," she said. "Something I don't know." He thought about it. This was something she did. She asked for the specific thing. Not conversation in general. Not "tell me about yourself," which was a question nobody could answer. She asked for the thing you would choose if you were choosing. He had learned that what you chose when you were choosing told her more than the information itself. "My grandmother had a sewing basket," he said. She called it the repair basket. Things that weren't finished yet, that still had use in them, buttons missing, seams gone. She worked through it in the evenings. I used to sit with her and watch her work, and she'd tell me about each piece, where it came from, who made it, why it was worth keeping. He looked at the water. "I think that's where I got it from. The fixing things. The not throwing away things," Nora said. "Yeah," she said, "throwing something away before it's truly done is a failure of imagination. That if you can't see how to fix it, you haven't looked hard enough yet." She was quiet for a moment, receiving this, turning it in the way she turned things. "Is that what you think about people too?" she said. He considered it honestly. "I think I'm more patient with objects than people," he said. "Objects don't complicate the fixing by having feelings about it. People complicate things," she said. "Enormously," he said. She smiled. Not the full one, the smaller one. The precise one. The one that meant she understood something. "I was with someone for 3 years," she said. "Before I came here, we didn't fight. We didn't have dramatic problems. There was nothing to point to." She moved her hand through the water. "I just looked up one day and realized I had been making myself smaller for so long, not because he asked. Me too. Just because smaller felt easier. I felt less and I couldn't find the edge of where I'd stopped and the accommodation had started." He listened. He had learned with her that listening was its own form of saying something, that she watched for what you did in the spaces as much as what you said in them. "The 18 months after were different," she said. "Hard but different. I was learning to take up the right amount of space again." She paused. "That sounds dramatic." "It doesn't," he said. And then, because it was true and because she offered him precision and he wanted to offer it back, "it sounds like the most necessary kind of work." She looked at him. The look had the quality of things that have been verified, something checked against an internal standard and confirmed. It was, she said. They stayed at the wall. The speaker cycled. A light came on in the building. Third floor. And then off again. Someone up for a moment, and back to bed. The night was the same warm dark around them. And the pool was the same blue. And they were standing at the shallow end, with their arms on the pool edge behind them. Close enough that when she turned slightly toward him their shoulders were almost but not quite touching. Almost but not quite, he thought, was a reasonable description of the last 7 months. He shifted on his feet and she shifted at the same moment, both of them adjusting, and their hands met on the pool's ledge backs of fingers. Brief and not quite accidental, and both of them went still. He didn't pull away. She didn't pull away. They stood with that point of contact between them, the fingers on the ledge, the warm water at their ribs, and the guitar doing its careful work. It lasted what it lasted. Then she moved not away, not retreating, just a small repositioning that allowed her hand to drift while making nothing of it, and she said, "Tell me what the radio is." He looked at the speaker. "What? You have a radio in your apartment?" She said. "I hear it sometimes. Late at night. When things are quiet. Tell me what station." He looked at her. She was not looking at him, she was looking at the pool ahead of them, her profile in the blue light. Her hands now folded in front of her in the water. "It's AM," he said. "Sports. Sometimes. Old programs when I can find them." He paused. "It belonged to my grandfather. I fixed the tuner." She nodded. Slowly. Like something that had been suspected was now confirmed. "I could tell it was old," she said. "The quality of it through the wall is different." Through the wall. She had heard it through the wall and identified the quality of the sound and known it was old equipment. He thought about all the things she had been paying attention to through 11 months of shared walls and 8 months of borrowed tools and 7 months of knocking, and all the things he had been paying attention to in return and calling it something other than what it was. "Nora," he said. She turned to look at him. "I'm going to ask one of the questions," he said. She held his eyes. "Okay," she said. "The towel in the bag," he said. "What color is it?" A pause, specific and complete. "Blue," she said. "What color are your towels?" Another pause. She held his eyes through all of it. "White," she said. "Mostly." He nodded. He looked at the bag under the table on the pool deck. Zipped closed. Organized. Packed before she knocked on his door. He looked at the 2 drinks. The 2 chairs. The speaker running a playlist someone had assembled rather than shuffled. "Okay," he said. "I have more questions." "I know," she said. "We have time." They got out of the pool without deciding to. It happened the way the other things had happened, incrementally. Without announcement. One small movement leading to the next, until they were both sitting on the concrete edge at the shallow end with their feet in the water. The pool behind them, and the table with the drinks and the bag and the speaker in front of them. Nora had gotten the drinks when she got out. She'd stopped at the table without asking. Refilled both glasses from the small cooler he'd noticed, but not remarked on when he first came through the gate. And brought them back, and handed him his and sat down beside him. That was the pattern. She did things without asking when she already knew the answer. And she had learned the answers over 14 months of paying attention to him in the way that people pay attention when the paying attention means something. He sat with that for a moment. It did not feel bad to be known. He had expected it might feel invasive, being this correctly anticipated. But it didn't. It felt like being in a room where the temperature was right, where someone had thought about the temperature before he arrived. The night was warm on their shoulders. Warmer out of the water than he'd expected. But they were still wet, and the slight breeze that came through the gap between buildings moved the warmth around enough that it was comfortable rather than heavy. Above them, the building showed its grid of lit and unlit windows. The lit ones. Fewer now, people going to bed. The building doing its slow nightly reduction to its essential self. The faucet in March, he said. She looked at him. I came over for the breaker, he said. And I noticed the drip. The washer was worn through. I went home and got the right size from my kit and came back and fixed it. He had not thought about whether to do it, he had simply done it. And then gone home and stood in his own kitchen and told himself it was a practical thing. A thing that needed doing. The kind of thing you did for a neighbor. You said thank you once and never mentioned it again. That bothered you, she said. I've been thinking about why, he said. I think the reason it stuck was that you didn't make a thing of it. You just let it be what it was. And I couldn't figure out if that meant it meant nothing or if it meant you were being careful about how much you let it mean. She looked at her glass, turning it in her hands. The second one, she said. He nodded. He had suspected, but suspicion and confirmation were different weights. If I'd made a thing of it, she said, it would have changed what it was. It would have become a debt or a favor or a gesture I owed you a response to, and what it actually was. She paused, finding it. What it actually was is that you noticed something that needed doing and you did it without being asked. That's not a favor. That's just who you are. She looked at the water. I didn't want to put language on it that made it smaller. He sat with that. He thought about his grandmother and the repair basket and the things she had said about what it meant to take care of something, that it was a form of respect. That doing it without announcing it was doing it for its own sake. That the announcement often changed the thing into something about the person doing it rather than the thing itself. You've been watching me for longer than March, he said. She considered her answer. I've been paying attention to you for about as long as I've lived here, she said. Actively watching in the sense of paying attention with a specific question in mind, maybe since January. January, he said. What happened in January? You fixed the lamp, she said. He looked at her. The one in your kitchen, she said. The bent arm, I'd seen it in the hall when you brought it in. It was clearly broken. Clearly something someone had thrown away. And then in January, you had it fixed, and you put it in the kitchen, and you could see it from the hallway when you opened your door. And I was coming back from a run, and your door was open a few inches, and I could see the lamp, and it was. She stopped. She set her drink on the concrete beside her. It was working. It was in the right place. It looked like it had been waiting for that spot the whole time. He remembered the lamp. A floor lamp from an estate sale. The arm bent at a wrong angle from being stored carelessly. The shade intact, but the stem cracked near the base. He had taken it apart. Recast the cracked section with epoxy and a fiber splint. Reset the arm at its intended angle. And replaced the wiring. It had taken 3 evenings and was his. And no one would know it from a lamp that had never been broken. You looked at it through my open door, he said. You came to the door a minute later and saw me, she said. I said I was going to ask about your paint color. All my units have the same paint, he said. I know, she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him with the expression she had when she had just confirmed the thing she'd already admitted and had no further deflection to offer. He found he liked this about her, the point at which she stopped managing the information and just let it be what it was. It was the same thing he'd liked about the faucet, the same quality, the accurate thing. Said plainly, with no architecture around it. You came back after that, he said. Twice, she said. I borrowed a measuring tape, then a level. You never used the level. You left it on my counter. I forgot it, she said. Did you? She pressed her lips together in the way she did when she was suppressing something. I was thinking about the lamp, she said. He laughed, short and genuine, and she smiled the full smile. Both of them in on the same thing now. The accumulation of small transparencies adding up to something that was clearly visible when you looked at all of them at once. Tell me something, he said. He gave it back to her. She thought about it. He watched her think the particular way she looked when she was being honest with herself about what to offer, sorting through options with the seriousness she brought to things that deserved it. I moved to this city for a job, she said. And I stayed in this building because the rent was right and the commute was manageable and there was parking. She paused. Those are the reasons I tell people. They're true. They're also not the whole story. What's the whole story? I needed to start over in a place that had no version of me in it. She said. Every city I'd lived in before had layers. People who knew me from before I figured out what I was doing. Places where I'd been a certain way. She looked at the building. This city was blank. No one knew me. I could be whoever I was becoming without having to explain the difference from who I'd been. He understood this. He had come to this building for different reasons, a job relocation, a lease ending, a sequence of practical decisions, but the sense of what she was describing he understood. The relief of a place that had no prior version of you to reconcile. Is it working? He said. 14 months in. She said. Yeah, it's working. She looked at him. Some of it is the place. Some of it is other things. Other things. He let the phrase sit without pressing it. And she let him let it sit. And they were quiet for a while. In the particular way they were quiet together, not empty. Not avoiding. Is just comfortable with the thing not yet said. A door opened somewhere in the building, one of the upper floors. A balcony door, and they heard voices briefly. Someone saying something to someone, and then it closed again, and the night came back to its pool and speaker quiet. The towel, he said. She looked at him. Tell me about the towel, he said. Not what color. Tell me when you put it in the bag. She was quiet for a moment, not hesitating. He'd learned the difference between her hesitation and her choosing. And this was choosing. This afternoon, she said. When I packed the bag, I put everything in, and then I thought about what you'd need and I put in the towel. You thought about what I'd need, he said. Before you knocked? Yes. So you knew you were going to knock? Yes. And you knew I was going to come. She held his eyes. I thought you would come, she said. I wasn't certain. But I thought you've been standing at the edge of things with me for a while, and I thought if I gave you a reason to step in, you would. He looked at the pool, the water, the light, the whole thing she had set up and lit and prepared and organized into a situation where he could step into it naturally, without having to cross a threshold that was labeled as such, because she had understood that he needed the threshold to be legible only in retrospect. I would have come if you'd just asked, he said. I know, she said, but then you'd have thought about it first. You would have come and been very careful, and I would have had to figure out how to get past the careful. And she looked at the water. I've watched you be careful for 7 months. Declan. I didn't want to fight the careful. I wanted to give it nowhere to go. He looked at her profile in the pool light. The water ran in a slow drip from her hair along her shoulder, and she let it go without reaching for her towel. And he noticed this, the way he noticed her things, the patience she had with discomfort when she had decided something more important was happening. It worked, he said. I know, she said. You're still here. He was still here. He had been still here for over 2 hours, which was not what you did. If you were being careful would have brought him down for 30 minutes and then given him a reason to go back upstairs. And he had not been looking for a reason because he had not wanted one, which was itself the answer to a question he had been walking around for 7 months. He looked at her and she looked at the water, and he reached out and tucked the strand of wet hair back from her face, a single motion. Simple. Unhurried, and she turned to look at him when he did it. And the look had the quality of something confirmed rather than something surprised. I'm going to stop being careful, he said, as a formal announcement. Okay, she said, and then, precisely, it's about time. He laughed again, more fully, and she smiled the full smile, and Mrs. Okafor was right. He thought. He had been very polite for a very long time, and it had been, by any measure, too long. He reached the bag before she did. He had gotten up to get towels, a practical decision. The concrete was starting to cool as the night moved further into its late hours. and they had been out of the water long enough that the wet was working from warmth into something else. He crossed the pool deck to the table and crouched down and unzipped the bag and reached in. The top towel was white. He recognized the cotton weave, the weight of it, the kind of towel sold in sets at a general goods store. Nothing specific about it except that it was hers. He set it aside on the table. Under it was a dark blue towel, not navy, the specific blue of a towel he had owned for 3 years, that had come with him through 2 apartments and a storage unit during the move, that lived on the hook by his bathroom door. It was not a color he had discussed with her. It was not a color he had mentioned in any context. It was the color she would have seen on the dozen occasions she'd been in his apartment for the returned wrench, for the borrowed tools, for the level she had forgotten because she was thinking about a lamp, on the hook by the bathroom. Each time, the same hook, the same towel, the same blue. He stayed crouched by the bag with the blue towel in his hands and let the full shape of the evening arrange itself in front of him. He thought about the pool lights and the utility closet. He thought about 2 drinks made in her apartment and carried down cold. He thought about the speaker and the playlist, and the 2 chairs angled toward each other and the small cooler and the canvas bag packed with the thoroughness of someone who had planned for a specific outcome. He thought about the swimsuit she had been wearing under the dress she said she'd forgotten. He thought about the towel in his color, packed for him. Before she knocked, he had spent 14 months explaining things to himself. Not maliciously, not in the way of someone actively working against their own understanding, but in the natural way of a person who had learned to be conservative with certainty, who had been wrong before about what things meant and had developed an aversion to being wrong again. A knock on the shared wall could be friendly. Coffee left outside his door could be neighborly. A text at 11 at night saying heard something on the radio that made me think of the typewriter could be the odd sociality of a person who kept late hours. He had held each thing up and examined it from the most neutral angle available and set it back down in a neutral category. The towel was not neutral. The towel was specific, and it had been packed before she knocked, and there was no neutral angle from which it read as anything other than what it was. He stood up. He crossed the pool deck with the blue towel in his hand. Nora was at the shallow end, still sitting on the edge with her feet in the water, and she looked up when she heard him cross, and she saw what was in his hand before she'd finished looking up. And something happened to her expression, a very small change, a quality of arrived at rather than surprised, like she had known this was the moment that was coming and had simply been waiting to be in it. He stopped a few feet from her. She didn't say anything. He didn't say anything. He stood on the pool deck holding the blue towel, and she sat at the edge of the water holding his eyes, and the speaker played whatever it was playing, and the water pool light moved its slow patterns on the concrete. "You packed this before you knocked on my door," he said. "Yes," she said. "You knew you were bringing me down here." "I thought I was," she said. "I hoped I was." She looked at the towel. "I wasn't certain. But you packed it. In case," she said. He looked at her. She looked back at him, and the expression had that quality he had come to know, the done managing quality. The thing laid out in its true dimensions without architecture around it. She was not deflecting. She had stopped deflecting somewhere in the last hour. Or possibly she had planned to stop deflecting before she came through his door, which would be consistent with everything else she had planned. "In March," he said, "when I fixed the faucet." "Yes," she said. "You said you'd been paying attention since January." "The lamp." "The paying attention with a specific question started in January," she said. "The noticing started before that." "How long before?" She looked at the water. "The green chair," she said. "The stairs. November before last. The night they had met. 11 months before March." He stood on the pool deck and recalculated, not surprised exactly, but doing the arithmetic of it, letting the length of time have its full weight. "You've been," he stopped, started again, "for 14 months. Longer than I planned to be," she said. with a small, precise quality in her voice that was not quite embarrassment and not quite apology. It became a habit before I had time to decide if it was a good one. And then you decided it was a good one. I decided to act on it, she said, which is not the same thing but is adjacent to it. He crossed the last few feet between them and crouched down to her level so they were eye to eye her on the edge of the pool. Him on the concrete in front of her, and he held the towel out. She looked at it, and then at him, and then she reached out and took it. And their hands overlapped on the fabric the way they had overlapped on the pool ledge earlier. Brief and warm, and both of them staying in it instead of pulling away. She pulled the towel around her shoulders. He stayed where he was. I knew, he said. She looked at him. Not everything, he said. Not the specifics, not the towel, but I knew at some level, in the part of me that notices things before I let myself think about them, I knew what the coffee outside my door meant. I knew what the knocking on the wall meant. I knew what it meant that you always knew when I'd had a bad week before I'd said anything about it. He paused. I just kept finding the most reasonable explanation I could and using that one instead. Why? She said. Not accusatory, just asking. He thought about how to answer honestly. Because the reasonable explanation didn't require anything from me, he said. And the accurate explanation required everything. She was very still. The pool light moved across the concrete around them, the slow shifting blue, and the night was warm on his back, and her face was the most legible he had ever seen it. All of the composure taken down to its essential self. Which was this a person who had decided something and was waiting to find out what he was going to decide? I'm done with the reasonable explanations, he said. Something in her face shifted, the final small shift of a thing that has been held a certain way for a long time, releasing into something it has been waiting to become. Not dramatic, small and real and completely unmistakable. The wall? She said. What about it? November, she said. You were on the phone. I could hear you laughing, not words. Just the quality of it. And I was having a terrible night and I knocked twice. She paused. You knocked back in about 4 seconds. I remember, he said. You didn't know what I was saying. No, he said, but I knew what you needed. She looked at him and the expression had that arrived at quality again. Something confirmed rather than discovered. You've been doing it too, she said. The language. This whole time, he said. 14 months of being very polite. Mrs. Okafor thinks we've wasted an enormous amount of time, he said. Mrs. Okafor is correct, she said. He moved his hand to her face, one hand, along her jaw, and she turned into it the way she might turn into warmth, and she put her hand over his on her face, not moving it, just adding hers on top, and they stayed like that on the edge of the pool, in the blue light, with the speaker going and the building quiet above them, and the night around them warm and still. I'm going to be less careful now, he said. You told me, she said. I'm reminding both of us, he said. Good, she said, and looked at him with the full, unmanaged expression, eyes as warm and steady as the pool light, certain in the way of things that have been true for a long time and are only now being named, because I have been waiting for you to arrive at this for 7 months, and I was starting to consider more dramatic measures. More dramatic than the swimsuit. I had a list, she said. He laughed. She smiled. He kissed her there on the edge of the pool, the concrete warm under his knees and the towel around her shoulders and the water behind her. And it was the end of a very long sentence that had been forming since November before last. And she kissed him back with the same deliberateness she brought to everything. And when they stopped, the pool was the same pool, and the night was the same night, and all of it was exactly as it had been, except that the question was no longer a question. He pulled back enough to look at her. She looked back. The expression was the one he didn't have a full word for yet, open and certain and resting. The quality of something that has been held tense for a long time and has finally been allowed to settle into its actual shape. The bag, he said. You planned all of it. Everything except what happens next, she said. I left that open. Good, he said. I want to have some input. I was hoping you would, she said. They stayed at the pool. It was past midnight. By then he had checked his watch when he went to get the towels, and it had said 11:51. And enough time had passed since for the number to have turned over, and the building above them was mostly dark. The grid of windows reduced to its smallest late-night population, a few lit rectangles where people were still awake for their own reasons. The city beyond the building made its steady ambient sound. The speaker was still going, quietly enough now that the music was more texture than content, something without lyrics that had settled into the background of the night. He got the white towel from the table and wrapped it around himself and sat back down beside her on the pool edge, both of them with their feet in the water, which was still warm from the August day it had absorbed. Their shoulders were touching now, not leaning, just present. Just the contact of two people who had stopped managing the distance between them and let gravity be what it is. She was the first to speak. The typewriter, she said. What about it? I texted you about it in February, she said. Heard something on the radio that made me think of the typewriter. I sent it, and then I stood in my kitchen for about 2 minutes wondering if I'd made an error. He remembered the text. He had been in his workshop at the time, the second bedroom he used as a workspace, and the text had come in, and he had read it and stood there with his phone in his hand, not answering for long enough that she had probably thought he was asleep. And then he had written back 3 words and set his phone down and stood there for another minute thinking about the fact that she had a reason to think of his typewriter. What did the radio say? He said. There was a story, she said, about a man who collected old typewriters. He said they each had a different voice, not just the mechanism, but the quality of what got written on them. He said things written on old typewriters had a different feeling to them because the effort was different. She looked at the water. I thought about the one in your hall, the one you brought up in October. The Olympia, he said. It needed a new platen and 3 key bars replaced. Do you use it? Sometimes, he said. Letters. Mostly. To who? He thought about how to answer. My grandmother's been gone for 12 years, he said. I write to her sometimes. Not for any reason. Just to continue the conversation. She was quiet for a moment. A genuine quiet. Not waiting to speak, but receiving. Then she said, I write to my mother. She's been gone 4 years. She paused. I didn't know other people did that. I didn't either, he said. Until now. They sat with that. The water moved in small circles around their feet, the pool's circulation doing its patient work. Somewhere in the building above them a door opened and closed. Very faint, someone's interior door. The sound traveling in the specific way sound traveled in this building, through pipes and shared walls, and the particular acoustic property of the stairwell, their stairwell, the one where he had carried the green chair. Tell me about before, he said. Before you came here, not the relationship, you don't have to tell me that. Tell me what you did. She thought about it. I was in Boston, she said. I worked at a rehabilitation center. Outpatient. I was good at it. I had friends I'd had since graduate school. I had a neighborhood I knew. She moved her feet in the water. Everything was fine. All of it was fine. And fine wasn't enough. Fine was the problem, she said. Fine is what you have when you've arranged everything to be manageable. When you've controlled for all the variables that might produce discomfort. She paused. You can live in fine for a long time without noticing that you've optimized everything except the actual living. He understood this. He had not come from fine, his version of the same thing had been different. More kinetic. More about motion than stasis. But the structure of what she was describing he recognized. The way you could have all the right pieces and still feel that something central was missing. Not because anything was wrong, but because everything had been arranged to prevent wrongness rather than to produce rightness. What made you leave? He said. I was at a patient's discharge appointment, she said. Man in his 60s. He'd had a significant stroke, lost most of his right side mobility, and we'd been working with him for 7 months, and on the last day he walked to the end of the hallway and back without his cane. And he turned around at the end, and his face. She stopped. She was quiet for a moment. His face had the look of someone who had gotten something back that they had been told was gone. Not happiness exactly. More like repair. She looked at her hands. I drove home from work that day and sat in my car in the parking garage and cried for about 20 minutes, and I could not have told you exactly why. And then I went upstairs and I gave notice. He looked at her. Because of the patient. Because of what the patient's face showed me that I did not have. She said, that feeling of something repaired, of being brought back. She glanced at him sideways. Your grandmother knew what she was talking about. Some things look done but aren't. You just have to look harder. He felt the sentence land in the specific way that sentences land when they are about more than one thing. He looked at the pool. The water. The light coming up through it and spreading across the concrete in its slow patterns. I'm glad you came here, he said. She turned to look at him. Me too, she said. And then, because she was precise, I'm particularly glad about 1114. The chair, he said. If the chair had fit in the elevator, I thought about that, she said. After January, when I was paying attention with the specific question, I thought about the fact that if the chair had fit in the elevator, none of this would have started the same way. She paused. The chair is not actually a bad chair. It's a perfectly functional chair for its size. The elevator is just slightly too narrow for it. The building was built in 1963, he said. Elevators were narrower then. Which means, she said, that we owe this entire situation to a 1963 building code. He laughed fully, genuinely, and she laughed with him, and the laughing went on a little longer than the joke warranted. The kind of laughter that is also about relief and the release of 14 months of something held carefully, and when it settled they were sitting closer than they had been, her shoulder against his, her hand resting on the pool deck between them. He put his hand over hers. She turned her hand palm up and laced her fingers through his, and they sat like that with their feet in the warm water and their hands laced together, and the speaker doing its quiet work, and the night around them doing the same. Same side of the pool, she said. After a while, he looked at her. I was thinking about it earlier, she said, when we were on opposite ends, and then when we ended up at the wall together, and now she looked at their sides. Shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand. We kept ending up on the same side. You planned for that, he said. I planned for a lot of things, she said. Not all of them went the way I planned. Which ones didn't? She considered. I thought I'd be more nervous, she said. I thought when the moment came I'd have trouble saying the things, but it was easier than I expected, like the words already knew where to go. He thought about that. About 14 months of paying attention to each other through walls and doorways and borrowed tools and two-knock conversations in the dark. About all the things that had been said in the language of actions, building up over time into something that already knew its own shape before either of them named it. We'd been talking for a long time, he said. Yeah, she said. We had. He brought her hand up and held it for a moment. I just held it. The specific weight of her hand in his. And then he kissed her again, not the same as the first one. Slower. Both of them more settled now. Less the ending of something and more the beginning of what came after, and she kissed him back, and the pool light moved its slow blue on the concrete around them. When they stopped, they stayed close. Her head rested against his shoulder and he let it. Turned his head slightly toward her. And they sat in that configuration on the edge of the pool, with the water lapping at their feet and the night finishing itself quietly around them. He didn't think about going upstairs. He didn't think about the morning, which would come in a few hours and would be what it was. He thought about his grandmother's repair basket, and about the green chair on the stairs, and about a blue towel packed in a bag before a knock on a door. and about how the longest route to a thing was sometimes the only one that arrived at the right version of it. Thursday, he said, which was what it now technically was. She said. We should sleep at some point. Probably, she said, and didn't move. He didn't move either. The speaker was still going. The pool light was still shifting. Above them, the building was almost entirely dark now, the city doing its late-night business in the middle distance. And down here on the pool deck at whatever time it was, the warmth had not left. The concrete had held the August heat through all the hours since sunset and was still giving it back. And they sat in it together, shoulder to shoulder, hand in hand, on the same side of the pool as they had been tending toward all along. Care that announces itself is still care, but it is not the deepest kind. The deepest kind packs a towel in the right color before it knocks on the door. It fixes a faucet without mentioning it. It knocks twice through a shared wall in the dark and means I am here, and knows that you will hear it and know what is meant. It chooses actions over declarations, because actions cannot be walked back and they have already happened. They are already true. They are the record of what someone thought was worth doing when no one was watching. Showing up without a reason given is often the only reason that counts. What is one thing you have done for someone quietly, without announcement, thinking they wouldn't notice that was more deliberate than you let on? Tell us. We already know it wasn't nothing.